The gold-veined marble stretched before me like frozen honey, so pristine I could see the ghost of my own reflection, pale, scattered, unraveling. My arms ached from the tower of rose-gold pastry boxes I'd stacked too high, corners biting into my forearms hard enough to leave red marks. I welcomed that small pain. It meant I was real, still here, still building something despite everything trying to pull me under. I'd been delivering to the Aurora Grand for 2 months, always through the service corridor with its gray walls and flickering lights where I was just another vendor. Today, the loading dock was closed for maintenance. The desk manager had waved me toward the main lobby with barely a glance. Of course. Because sneaking through one of Connor's favorite networking hotels wasn't already making my skin crawl. The lobby soared above me, all champagne-colored marble and geometric bronze fixtures that split light into sharp angles. Everything smelled expensive: leather, bergamot, money. My canvas sneakers chirped against the polished floor with every step, a rhythm that announced "doesn't belong here, doesn't belong here." I kept my eyes on the elevator bank across the crimson carpet runner. 34 steps. I'd counted them last time. 34 steps and I could disappear into the service elevator, deliver my champagne truffles to the executive kitchen, collect my check, and vanish back to my tiny commercial kitchen where the walls didn't judge me. 34 steps. I could survive that. Elara. The voice turned my blood to slush. That smooth, controlled tenor with its edge of ownership, like I was a lost possession he'd finally spotted. My feet stuttered mid-step, and the top box wobbled dangerously. I didn't turn around. Maybe if I kept moving, he'd convince himself he was mistaken. Maybe for once, the universe would let me be invisible. Elara, stop. I see you. Footsteps behind me, sharp dress shoes on marble, purposeful. My throat closed. I walked faster, boxes trembling in my grip. 22 steps to the elevators. Just 22 more. Don't you dare walk away from me. His hand locked around my elbow, not hard enough to bruise, never where marks would show, but unyielding enough to spin me around. The boxes tilted, and I had to catch them against my chest, crushing delicate piping work I'd spent 3 hours perfecting. Connor looked like he'd stepped out of a board meeting or a catalog. Tailored navy suit, hair swept back with that same expensive pomade, green eyes that I'd once thought were warm but now recognized as appraising. Calculating. Cold. I'm working, I managed, hating the waver in my voice. I have a delivery. Please let me go. Let you go? Like you let me go 6 months ago? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Disappeared in the middle of the night, changed your number, hid behind your little baking hobby. We had plans, Elara. A timeline. My partners were expecting to meet my fiancé at the Christmas gala. Do you have any idea how that looked? Of course. It always circled back to his image. His disappointment. His inconvenience. We talked about this, I said, taking a half step back. The boxes shifted. I gave you the ring back. I explained in my letter. A letter. He pronounced it like a disease. 3 years together, and you thought a letter was acceptable. You embarrassed me, Elara. Made me look weak in front of people who matter. 3 years. 3 years of shrinking myself to fit his vision of the perfect partner, the sweet pastry chef who'd bake for his networking dinners while wearing the right dresses and laughing at the right jokes. 3 years of him suggesting, I lose 5 pounds, close my fledgling business to focus on us, stop seeing friends who didn't understand our lifestyle. The day I'd left with just my grandmother's recipes and my mixer, signing a lease on the smallest commercial kitchen in the city, I'd felt my lungs expand for the first time in months. I'm sorry you felt embarrassed, I said, aiming for steady. But we weren't right for each other. You know that. What I know is you owe me a real conversation. Adult to adult. His fingers tightened on my elbow. The hotel bar. 20 minutes. Then you can make your delivery. We both knew it wouldn't be 20 minutes. It would stretch into an hour, then lunch, then he'd drive me back to my kitchen while reminding me how good we were together, how I was overreacting, how I'd never manage on my own. I'd watched this script play out before. I looked past him desperately, for security, for hotel staff, for anyone who might intervene. The concierge studied his computer screen with sudden intensity. A couple in designer athleisure swerved wide around us, eyes averted. The lobby, for all its golden opulence, was a stage where everyone had silently agreed not to see me. I was alone. Again. The realization lit something sharp in my chest. I twisted hard, using the moves Simone had drilled into me during those Saturday self-defense classes. Connor's grip broke with a satisfying sound of surprise. The boxes lurched, but I caught them, flour dust puffing into the air between us. Ilera. His shout ricocheted off the high ceilings. I ran. Not walked quickly, not hurried, ran, my sneakers squealing on that perfect marble as I sprinted toward the elevator bank. My reflection in the polished bronze doors showed a woman I barely recognized, wild-eyed, flower in her dark hair, clutching pastry boxes like armor. I slammed my palm against the call button. Once. Twice. 3 times, as if desperation could summon the car faster. Behind me, Connor's footsteps accelerated, his voice sharp, "You're being ridiculous." The doors slid open with a crystalline chime that sounded like rescue. I threw myself forward blindly, thinking only, anywhere but here, metal between us, one moment to breathe. My shoulder collided with something immovable. Solid. Warm. The pastry boxes tumbled from my arms, and I braced for the crash of $400 worth of champagne truffles and candied violets shattering across the elevator floor. Strong hands caught them midair. All of them. Plucked from their descent with startling precision, steadied before a single gold leaf detail could smudge. I looked up, gasping, into the most controlled face I'd ever seen. The man holding my pastry boxes didn't move. Didn't shift his weight, didn't adjust his stance to accommodate the woman who just crashed into him like a wrecking ball. He simply stood there, absorbing the impact as if I weighed nothing, as if chaos was something that happened around him but never to him. He was tall enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes, which was saying something because I wasn't short. The suit was charcoal, so dark it was nearly black, cut with the kind of precision that whispered Italian tailoring and a price tag I didn't want to imagine. No tie. The collar of his white shirt was open just enough to seem deliberate, not careless. Everything about him was deliberate. But it was his face that made my breath catch. Not handsome in the soft way Connor had been handsome, all symmetry and careful grooming. This was something sharper. Harder. A strong jaw shadowed with stubble that suggested he'd been awake since before dawn. Dark hair swept back from a face built of clean lines and angles. And eyes, gray, I thought, or perhaps a brown so dark they only looked gray in the elevator's golden light, that assessed me with the kind of attention that made me feel simultaneously seen and examined. My voice came out strangled. I tried again. "I'm so sorry." I wasn't looking. "No," he agreed, his voice low and even, the kind of calm that felt like expensive whiskey sounded. "You weren't." It wasn't an accusation. Just a statement of fact, delivered without judgment, which somehow made it worse. Heat flooded my cheeks. Behind me, I could hear Connor's voice rising in the lobby, demanding someone hold the elevator, and my panic resurged like a wave. "Please," I gasped, reaching for the door close button. "Please, I need." The man shifted slightly, and I realized he was still holding my boxes. All 6 of them, balanced in his arms like he'd been born to carry rose-gold pastry containers, even though they looked absurdly delicate against the severe lines of his suit. With one hand, he pressed the button for the penthouse level, then the door close button, his movements unhurried despite my obvious distress. The doors slid shut with a soft, final sound just as Connor's face appeared in the gap, his hand reaching. Then nothing. Just smooth bronze panels reflecting my wild expression back at me. The elevator began its ascent with barely a whisper of movement, the kind of engineered silence that only existed in buildings where even the machinery was expensive. I sagged against the wall, my legs suddenly unreliable, my breath coming in sharp bursts that fogged the polished brass handrail. "Thank you," I managed. "Thank you, I." The words died as I looked down. Flour. Everywhere. A white explosion across the elevator floor, powder coating the pristine carpet in a pattern that tracked my panicked entry. One of the boxes must have opened on impact, because there were sugared rose petals scattered like confetti, pale pink against the gray carpet. A chocolate truffle had rolled into the corner, its gold leaf catching the light. Oh no. Oh no, no, no. I dropped to my knees, my hands fluttering uselessly over the mess. This was the Aurora Grand. This was probably a private elevator. This was the penthouse level, the man said above me, still in that maddeningly calm voice. "You're delivering to the executive kitchen." I looked up at him, still kneeling in the wreckage of my professional reputation, flour dusting my jeans and probably my face. He gazed down at me with an expression I couldn't read, not angry, not amused, just watchful. Like he was waiting to see what I'd do next. Yes. I mean, I was. Before I gestured helplessly at the disaster zone. "I'll clean this. I have towels in my car. I can come back in." "You're shaking." The observation was quiet, almost gentle, and it made something in my chest crack. I was shaking. My hands trembled as I tried to gather rose petals, my whole body vibrating with adrenaline and fear and the crushing weight of humiliation. "I'm fine," I lied. His head tilted slightly, and those dark eyes sharpened with something that might have been interest or might have been assessment. "No," he said, with the same certainty he'd said I wasn't looking. "You're not." The elevator chimed softly, announcing our arrival at the top floor. The elevator doors began to open with their crystalline chime, revealing a hallway of cream marble and recessed lighting that promised escape. I started to rise from my flour-dusted crouch, already composing an apology for the executive chef who was probably wondering where his champagne truffles were. A hand slammed between the opening doors. Connor's hand, his college ring glinting as his fingers wedged into the gap, forcing the doors to judder and retreat. My stomach dropped. "Elara." His voice carried that edge I knew too well, the one that meant he'd decided to stop being reasonable. "Get out here. Now." I froze, halfway to standing, rose petals still clinging to my palms. The man in the charcoal suit shifted almost imperceptibly, placing himself between me and the doors with a movement so subtle I almost missed it. He still held my pastry boxes, balanced in one arm now, as if they weighed nothing. "This is a private elevator," he said, his tone unchanged, still that low, whiskey-smooth calm. But something in it made the air feel heavier. "Remove your hand." Connor's eyes flicked to him, irritation flashing across his face. "This is between me and my fiancé." "Elara, stop being dramatic, Anne." "I'm not your fiancé," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I haven't been for 6 months." "Remove your hand," the man repeated, quieter this time. Somehow that made it worse. More final. For a second, Connor hesitated. He was good at reading rooms, at understanding power dynamics and social hierarchies. It was how he'd climbed so far in his father's firm without actually doing much work. Something in the stranger's stillness must have registered, because Connor's hand started to withdraw. Then his eyes landed on me, still kneeling in the flour and wreckage, and his expression hardened with that familiar stubbornness. "We're not done talking." His fingers spread wider, wedging deeper into the gap. The elevator made a sound I'd never heard an elevator make, a mechanical groan, followed by a sharp metallic screech. The lights flickered. The floor lurched beneath me hard enough that I fell back against the wall, and even the man in the suit had to brace one hand against the panel to steady himself. The door spasmed once, twice, then snapped shut with a violence that made me flinch. Connor's shout of pain was muffled by the bronze panels. Then, silence. The elevator didn't move. The soft hum of machinery that I hadn't noticed until it stopped was suddenly, conspicuously absent. The lights flickered again, dimmed, then stabilized at about half their original brightness, casting everything in a warmer, more intimate gold. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the flour that puffed up around me, and jabbed at the button panel. The penthouse button. The lobby button. The door open button. Nothing responded. The numbers above the door were dark, frozen between floors, and when I pressed my ear to the crack between the doors, I could hear nothing but my own racing heartbeat. "We're stuck," I said, stupidly, because that was obvious. "We're stuck because I. My delivery. My payment. The 3 other orders I had scheduled for this afternoon. The suppliers I owed money to, the landlord who'd given me one extension already on my kitchen rent. The careful, precarious tower of my new life that I'd built one pastry box at a time, all of it threatening to collapse because I'd been careless enough to let Connor corner me. "Breathe," the man said behind me. I spun to face him, my panic finding a target. "Breathe?" "We're trapped in an elevator because my psychotic ex-fiancé can't take no for an answer, and I've just destroyed what's probably a very expensive carpet, and I'm going to lose every client I have because I can't make my deliveries." "Breathe," he repeated, firmer this time. He'd set the pastry boxes down on the brass handrail shelf, arranging them with more care than they deserved given the circumstances. When he straightened, the dim lighting carved shadows under his cheekbones, made his eyes darker. "The emergency response system will activate within 3 minutes. The hotel has a maintenance team on call 24 hours. We'll be out soon." His certainty should have been reassuring. Instead, it made me suspicious. "How do you know that?" "I know many things about this hotel." He leaned against the wall opposite me, one hand sliding into his pocket, utterly relaxed despite being trapped between floors with a hysterical pastry chef. "For instance, I know this is the private penthouse elevator. I know it requires a key card to access from the lobby level." His head tilted slightly. "I know you don't have a key card." The observation hung between us in the golden half-light. "The kitchen manager gave me temporary access," I said, though my voice had lost its certainty. "For deliveries." "Did they?" It wasn't a question. Something about the way he watched me, patient, analytical, like he was reading a story written on my face, made my skin prickle with awareness. Not fear, exactly. Something more complicated. "Who are you?" I asked. The ghost of something that might have been amusement touched his mouth. "I think the more interesting question is who you're running from, and whether you're finished running yet." The elevator felt smaller suddenly, the golden walls pressing in despite the vaulted ceiling and polished brass fixtures. Or maybe it was just him, taking up space without moving, his presence filling the small cage in a way that had nothing to do with his physical size. "I'm not running," I said, but my voice shook, betraying me. "I'm working." "There's a difference." "Is there?" Again, not a question. He said it like he already knew the answer, like he'd watched the entire scene in the lobby unfold and had drawn his own conclusions. Which was impossible. He'd been in the elevator. He couldn't have seen. Could he? My breath came faster. The air felt thick, honeyed, hard to pull into my lungs. I pressed my back against the wall, my fingers finding the brass handrail and gripping it hard enough to hurt. The metal was cold, real, something to anchor to while my thoughts spiraled. The emergency system, I managed. You said 3 minutes. I did. It's been longer than that. It has. He didn't move, didn't even shift his weight. Just watched me with those dark, unreadable eyes while I slowly came apart in front of him. My chest tightened. How long had it been? 5 minutes? 10? What if the system had failed? What if we were stuck here for hours? Connor was still out there, probably pacing the lobby, probably calling building security, probably spinning some story about his unstable ex-girlfriend who needed help. You're hyperventilating, the man observed, clinical and calm. I'm aware, I snapped, but the words came out breathless, weak. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. I closed my eyes, trying to remember what Simone had taught me in those classes. Count to 4. Hold. Release. But I couldn't count, couldn't focus, couldn't do anything but feel the walls closing in and my carefully constructed world crumbling outside these bronze doors. Look at me. The command in his voice made my eyes open on instinct. He still hadn't moved, still had one hand in his pocket like we were at a cocktail party instead of trapped between floors. But something had changed in his expression, not softness, exactly, but a kind of focused attention that felt like a hand reaching through dark water. Your name, he said. Tell me your name. You heard it. In the lobby. Tell me anyway. Elara. The word came out small. Elara Vance. Elara. He said it like he was testing the weight of it, the shape. And the man in the lobby. The one who damaged hotel property and assaulted a vendor. What's his name? The question was so matter-of-fact, so businesslike, that it cut through some of my panic. Connor. Connor Hale. And you were engaged to him. I was. Past tense. Important. 6 months ago. I left. Because he hurt you. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Not the way you mean. He never hit me. He was just controlling. Everything had to be his way. How I dressed, who I saw, what I did with my business. He made me feel small. I laughed, and it came out broken. God, that sounds so stupid. People have real problems, and I'm having a panic attack because my ex grabbed my arm. He put his hands on you without permission, the man interrupted, his voice dropping half an octave. He trapped you in a public space. He damaged property to prevent your escape. These are not small things, Elara Vance. The way he said my full name made something flutter in my chest that wasn't panic. I forced myself to breathe, to really look at him. He was younger than I'd first thought, mid-30s, maybe. Handsome in a way that felt dangerous, like a blade wrapped in silk. And there was something in his stillness that was almost hypnotic, like he'd mastered the art of conservation, of only moving when movement served a purpose. Who are you? I asked again, softer this time. Someone who doesn't like men who make women feel small. He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, and someone who owns this building. The words didn't register at first. Then they did, and I felt my face flame. Oh God. I looked down at the flower explosion, the scattered rose petals, the ruined carpet. Oh God, I destroyed your elevator. I'm so sorry, I'll pay for the cleaning, I can. I don't want your money. Something in the way he said it made me look up. He was watching me with an intensity that should have frightened me but didn't, quite. Like I was a puzzle he'd decided to solve, or a problem he'd chosen to fix. "Then what do you want?" I whispered. The lights flickered again, plunging us into darkness for one heartbeat, two, before the emergency backup engaged with a soft mechanical hum. In the red-tinged glow of the emergency lighting, his face was all shadows and sharp angles. "To understand," he said quietly, "why you're still shaking when he can't reach you anymore." The emergency lighting painted everything in shades of rust and shadow, turning the elegant elevator into something that felt almost dreamlike. Or nightmarish. I couldn't decide which. "I should clean this up," I said, grateful for a task, for something to do with my hands that wasn't clawing at the walls. I knelt again in the flour, reaching for the fallen truffle in the corner. "Before the mess sets into the carpet permanently." "Leave it." "I can't just." "Leave it," he repeated, quieter but somehow more absolute. "The carpet is insured. Your pastries are not." I looked up at him, confused, and found him nodding toward the boxes still balanced on the brass shelf. "Those 5 are intact. Focus on what survived." It was such a simple directive, so practical, that I found myself obeying. I stood, brushing flour from my knees, and carefully lifted the lid of the top box. The champagne truffles gleamed up at me, their gold leaf catching the red emergency light, each one perfect and whole. Relief weakened my knees. "They're okay," I breathed. "They actually survived. You built them well." He said it like a statement of fact, not a compliment. I moved to the next box, checking the candied violets, the rose macarons, the tiny lemon tarts with their mirror glaze still flawless. My hands steadied as I worked, the familiar ritual of checking my creations grounding me more effectively than any breathing exercise. "Connor hated that I baked," I said, surprising myself. Maybe it was the emergency lighting, the enclosed space, the surreal intimacy of being trapped with a stranger who somehow made confession feel easier than silence. At first, he thought it was charming. His girlfriend, the pastry chef. He'd bring clients by the bakery where I worked, show me off like I was part of his portfolio. I closed the macaron box, moved to the next one. But then I started talking about opening my own place. Nothing big, just a small commercial kitchen where I could take custom orders, build a client base. He said it was impractical. That I should focus on us instead of chasing a hobby. A hobby. The word came out flat, edged with something that might have been contempt. That's what he called it. Even though I'd gone to culinary school, even though I'd worked under a James Beard nominee for 2 years. It was just a hobby. A phase. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. He wanted me to quit, to focus on being the kind of partner who could host dinner parties and make small talk with investors' wives. He had this whole timeline planned out: engagement at 25, married by 26, first baby by 28. My career wasn't part of the equation. The stranger, the owner of this building, I reminded myself, didn't interrupt. He just watched, that same focused attention that made me feel simultaneously exposed and strangely safe. When I told him I'd signed a lease on a kitchen space, he lost it. I checked the 4th box, finding the chocolate bourbon balls pristine. "Not in the way you'd think." He didn't yell. He just got very calm, very controlled. Started pointing out all the ways I was going to fail. How I didn't have enough capital, enough connections, enough business sense. How I'd be begging to come back to the bakery within 6 months. My throat tightened. The worst part was, some of what he said was true. I didn't have enough capital. I was taking a huge risk. But he made it sound like certainty, like my failure was inevitable, and the only smart thing to do was give up before I embarrassed myself. "But you didn't give up." It wasn't a question. "No. I opened the last box, checking the final layer of truffles. All perfect. All whole. I left him instead. Moved into a studio apartment above my kitchen space. Took out a small business loan. Started from nothing. I looked at the 5 intact boxes, at the proof of what I'd built in 6 months. These deliveries, they're everything. The Aurora Grand executive chef, he's been my biggest client. He orders twice a week, pays on time, refers me to other hotels. If I lose this contract because I couldn't make one delivery, you won't lose it. The certainty in his voice made me look up. In the red-tinged shadows, his expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that looked almost like approval. You don't know that, I said. I know the executive chef reports to the food and beverage director, who reports to the general manager, who reports to me. He paused, letting that sink in. I know that anyone talented enough to create something that survives being dropped in a malfunctioning elevator is talented enough to keep their contract. My heart did something complicated in my chest. You can't just, I don't want special treatment. I want to earn. You have earned it. That's not the question. He shifted slightly, and even that small movement felt deliberate, purposeful. The question is what happens when we leave this elevator and Connor Hale is still waiting. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implication. I should have felt afraid, trapped in a broken elevator with a man I didn't know, a man who'd just casually mentioned he owned this entire building. Instead, I felt something closer to curiosity, sharpened by the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. Connor won't wait, I said, trying to sound more certain than I felt. He'll leave. He has a meeting at 3, he never misses. Connor Hale, junior associate at Hale and Morrison Legal. The stranger's voice was casual, conversational, like he was commenting on the weather. Trust fund. Georgetown Law, graduated middle of his class. Works for his father's firm doing corporate contract review. Drives a leased Mercedes. Lives in a Brookline condo his parents bought as an investment. He paused. Shall I continue? My mouth went dry. How do you? He's been here 4 times in the past 2 months. Twice for lunch meetings in the restaurant, once for drinks in the lobby bar, once for a networking event in the second-floor conference room. He said it like he was reciting a grocery list. He tips poorly and treats the waitstaff like furniture. Last week, he complained that his steak was overcooked and demanded it be comped, even though he'd eaten 3/4 of it. I stared at him. You remember all your guests? I remember the ones who matter. And I remember the ones who are problems. His gaze held mine. Connor Hale is both. Something cold slithered down my spine. What do you mean, both? He pushed off the wall, finally, and the small space seemed to shrink further as he closed half the distance between us. Not threatening, he maintained careful space, but suddenly more present, more real than the shadows and emergency lighting. I mean that men like him exist in a particular ecosystem. They network in places like this because they want to be seen, to be associated with success they haven't earned. They bring clients here, dates here, colleagues here, because the Aurora Grand's reputation does work their personality can't. He spoke without inflection, but I heard the judgment beneath it. And they survive by making people smaller than them. Waiters. Girlfriends. Anyone who can't fight back without consequences. You've been watching him, I said slowly. I watch everyone in my building. He said it simply, matter-of-factly. It's how I know which guests to cultivate and which to quietly discourage from returning. It's how I know the concierge has been skimming from the tip pool, and how I know the evening bartender is stealing top-shelf vodka and replacing it with well liquor. I thought about the concierge who'd looked away when Connor grabbed me. The hotel staff trained to ignore minor disputes. They didn't help me, I said. In the lobby. I looked for security, for anyone, and they all just looked away. Because they didn't know which side their loyalty should fall on. His voice dropped lower, acquiring an edge I hadn't heard before. A guest with a networking history, or an unknown vendor making a scene. They made a calculated choice based on incomplete information. And if they'd had complete information? Then they would have known that Connor Hale is no longer welcome at the Aurora Grand as of approximately. He glanced at his watch, the motion fluid and precise, 20 minutes ago, when he attempted to assault someone on my property. The words hung in the red-tinged air. I tried to process what he was saying, what it meant. You can do that? Just ban him? I can do many things, Elara Vance. I own every inch of this building. Every marble tile in that lobby, every crystal in those chandeliers, every elevator between the ground and the sky. He said it without arrogance, just cold fact. I decide who enters, who stays, and who leaves. And I've decided that men who put their hands on women in my lobby, who damage my property because they can't control their entitlement, don't get to come back. My pulse hammered in my throat. This should have frightened me. This kind of power, wielded this casually, should have sent every alarm bell ringing. But instead, I felt something uncomfortably close to relief. Why? The question came out barely above a whisper. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you do that? He was quiet for a moment, studying me with that intense, analytical gaze that made me feel transparent. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than I'd heard it yet. Because I know what it looks like when someone is building something from nothing. I recognize the exhaustion, the determination, the fear that one wrong move will topple everything. He paused. And I know what it looks like when someone else is trying to destroy it, piece by piece, just because they can. Something in his tone suggested he wasn't just talking about me anymore. Who are you? I asked for the third time, but now the question meant something different. Matteo De Luca, he said. And I think it's time we got you out of here. The emergency lights flickered once, as if responding to his declaration. Then they died completely. The darkness was absolute. Not the soft darkness of a bedroom at night, where your eyes adjust and shapes emerge from shadow. This was the thick, disorienting blackness of being buried, of existing in a space where light had been swallowed whole. I heard my own sharp intake of breath, too loud in the sudden silence. Elara. Matteo's voice came from where he'd been standing, steady and unhurried. Stay still. The backup will engage in a moment. But I couldn't stay still. The darkness pressed against my skin like something physical, and the walls felt closer now, the ceiling lower. My hands fumbled for the brass rail, found it, gripped hard enough that my knuckles screamed. I can't, my voice cracked. I can't see anything. I know. Breathe. Everyone keeps telling me to breathe, I said, and it came out sharp, edged with hysteria. Like it's that simple. Like I can just. It is that simple. His voice moved, closer now. Not touching close, but near enough that I could feel the displacement of air. In, 4 counts. Hold, 4 counts. Out, 4 counts. With me. I wanted to snap at him, to tell him that breathing exercises didn't work when you were trapped in the dark with a stranger who owned buildings and banned people and somehow knew everything about everyone. But his voice in the blackness was the only solid thing to hold on to besides the rail, so I tried. In. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good, he murmured. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Out. By the third cycle, my heart had stopped trying to claw its way out of my chest. By the fifth, I realized I could hear him breathing too, slow and measured, a rhythm I could match. The darkness was still absolute, but it felt less suffocating with that sound in it. Better? He asked. Better, I admitted. Then, because the darkness made me brave, do you do this a lot? Talk people down from panic attacks in broken elevators? No. A pause. But I know what it's like to feel trapped. The admission surprised me. Matteo De Luca didn't seem like someone who'd ever felt trapped by anything. He moved through the world like he owned it, which, apparently, in this building, he literally did. I don't believe that, I said. Believe it. His voice was closer now, maybe 3 feet away. Close enough that I caught his scent, something expensive and clean, cedar and something darker I couldn't name. There are many kinds of cages, Ilera. Some have bars. Some have marble floors and gold fixtures. Before I could ask what he meant, the backup system engaged with a low hum. But instead of the bright golden light from before, only a single amber emergency bulb flickered to life in the corner, casting everything in shades of honey and shadow. It was just enough to see by, just enough to make out shapes and faces, but it transformed the elevator into something intimate. Private. I could see Matteo clearly now, and the dim light did something to his features that the harsh overhead lighting hadn't. It softened the sharp angles of his jaw, emphasized the surprising fullness of his mouth, caught on the silver threading through his dark hair at his temples. He'd moved closer than I'd realized, close enough that if I reached out, I could touch him. I didn't reach out. But I didn't step back either. You're not what I expected, I said softly. What did you expect? His eyes were dark in the amber light, unreadable. I don't know. Someone colder. More. I searched for the word. Corporate. Distant. You own a luxury hotel. You probably own other things too. But you're standing here in a broken elevator, talking me through a panic attack like you have all the time in the world. Perhaps I do. His gaze held mine, and something in it made my breath catch for reasons that had nothing to do with panic. Or perhaps I recognized that some things are worth making time for. The air between us felt charged, heavy with something I didn't have a name for. This wasn't the controlling weight of Connor's attention, which had always felt like being studied for flaws. This was different. Matteo looked at me like I was a problem he wanted to solve, but also like the solving would be interesting. Pleasurable, even. You're dangerous, I said, and meant it. Yes. He didn't deny it, didn't soften it with false modesty. But not to you. How do I know that? You don't. He shifted slightly, and the movement brought him half a step closer. Still not touching, still maintaining that careful distance, but near enough that I could see the individual threads of his shirt, the dark shadow of stubble along his jaw. But I think you're learning to trust your instincts again. So trust them now. Am I a threat to you, Ilera Vance? I should have said yes. Should have remembered that I barely knew him, that power like his came with costs, that I'd just escaped one controlling man and walking toward another, even a different kind of another, was foolish. But standing there in the amber shadows, watching him watch me with that patient, focused intensity, I realized something. Connor had made me feel small. Matteo made me feel seen. No, I whispered. You're not. His expression shifted, not quite a smile, but something warmer than his usual control. Good. Then let me help you. Help me? I echoed, my voice still soft in the amber darkness. You've already helped. You closed the doors, you're banning Connor from the hotel, you're keeping my contract. That's not help, Matteo interrupted. That's basic human decency. What I'm offering is something more. The way he said it made my pulse skip. I don't understand. He was quiet for a moment, and in the dim light I watched him weigh his words with the same precision he seemed to apply to everything. When he spoke, His voice was measured, deliberate. When these doors open, Connor Hale will likely still be in my lobby. He'll have worked himself into a state, righteous anger, wounded pride, whatever story he's telling himself to justify his behavior. He'll try to approach you again. My stomach knotted. I'd been trying not to think about that, about what happened after this strange interlude ended and reality crashed back in. I'll go out the service exit, I said. If you could just have someone show me. No. The single word was absolute. No more service exits. No more sneaking through back corridors like you're the one who should be ashamed. No more making yourself small. The words hit something deep in my chest. I'd been making myself small for so long I'd forgotten there was any other way to exist. Small enough to fit Connor's vision, small enough to avoid his criticism, small enough to slip through luxury hotel lobbies without being noticed. I don't know how to be anything else, I admitted, the confession pulled out of me by the darkness and his unwavering attention. Then learn. He said it simply, like it was that easy. Starting now. Starting when those doors open. And how exactly am I supposed to do that? Mateo moved then, just slightly, and suddenly we were close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow that I hadn't noticed before. You walk out of this elevator beside me. Not behind me, not rushing past to avoid conflict, beside me. As my guest, under my protection, in my hotel. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. And Connor Hale learns very quickly that you are no longer a woman he can corner, manipulate, or touch without consequences. My breath caught. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. The distinction seemed important to him. I've spent the last 20 minutes watching you hold yourself together with pastry boxes and sheer stubbornness. I've watched you apologize for taking up space, for having the audacity to run from a man who was hurting you. And I've decided that I'm tired of watching. Tired of watching, I repeated, testing the words. I observe, Alara. It's what I do. I watch people move through my properties, through my world, and I assess. Who's genuine, who's performing? Who builds, who destroys? His eyes held mine with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. And sometimes, rarely, I see someone worth stepping in for. Worth protecting. Worth claiming. The last word seemed to echo in the small space. Claiming? Poor word choice, he said, but his expression suggested it wasn't. What I mean is this, your life as a woman on the run ends when these doors open. Your life as someone remarkable, someone who deserves safety, respect, and the freedom to build her dreams without someone trying to tear them down, that life begins. I should have been frightened by the possessive edge in his voice, by the absolute certainty with which he spoke about rearranging my life. But Connor's control had felt like drowning, like being slowly erased. This felt like being offered air. Why? The question came out barely audible. Why would you do this for someone you just met? Mateo's expression shifted, something almost vulnerable flickering across his features before his control reasserted itself. Because I know what it costs to build something from nothing. Because I recognize ambition and talent when I see it. And because, he paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully, because when you ran into this elevator, desperate and afraid and still clutching those pastry boxes like your life depended on them, I saw something I haven't seen in a very long time. What? Someone worth fighting for who hasn't realized they're worth fighting for yet. The words settled over me like a physical touch. No one had ever said anything like that to me. Connor had told me I was difficult, impractical, too ambitious for my own good. My parents had worried I was making mistakes, taking too many risks. Even my friends, well-meaning as they were, had suggested maybe I was pushing too hard, expecting too much. But Matteo De Luca, a man who owned hotels and banned people and knew things he shouldn't know, looked at me in the amber darkness and saw someone worth fighting for. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. "Say yes." His voice was soft but absolute. "Say yes, and let me handle Connor. Say yes, and walk out of here like you own the place. Say yes, and stop running." The emergency system chose that moment to hum back to life. The lights brightened slightly, and somewhere above us, machinery groaned and clicked. The elevator shuddered. "We're moving," I said, unnecessary but true. "We are." Matteo straightened, his hand emerging from his pocket to adjust his cuff with that same precise grace. "So choose quickly, Alara Vance. Do you walk out of here alone, or do you walk out under my protection?" The elevator continued its slow ascent toward the penthouse level. I looked at him, at this dangerous, controlled man who'd somehow seen past my flower-dusted panic to something he called remarkable, and made my choice. "Yes," I said. His smile was slight, controlled, but I caught the satisfaction in his eyes. "Good. Then let me show you what it looks like when someone actually has your back." The elevator chimed softly as we reached the penthouse level, the sound almost apologetic after everything that had happened. My heart hammered against my ribs as the doors began to slide open, revealing not the quiet hallway I'd expected but a small crowd of people in dark suits with earpieces and radios. Security. At least 6 of them, standing at attention like they'd been waiting. Behind them, a woman in a sharp burgundy blazer held a tablet, her expression professionally neutral but her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Mr. DeLuca," she said, relief evident in her voice. "The system alerted us to the malfunction. Are you?" "I'm fine, Victoria." Matteo's voice had shifted back to that smooth, authoritative tone he'd used when Connor first wedged his hand in the doors. All business now, the intimacy of the amber darkness tucked away like it had never existed. "But we have a situation in the lobby that requires immediate attention." He stepped out of the elevator with that same fluid grace, and I hesitated for just a second before following. My legs felt unsteady, my flower-dusted jeans and disheveled appearance suddenly glaring under the bright hallway lights. I must have looked like exactly what I was, a pastry chef who'd been through hell in the last half hour. But Matteo turned back, extending his hand toward me. Not demanding, just offering. An invitation. I took it. His hand was warm, calloused in a way that surprised me, not the soft hands of someone who only pushed papers and signed contracts. These were hands that had worked, that had built something. His fingers closed around mine with gentle certainty, and he drew me forward to stand beside him. Not behind. Beside. "This is Alara Vance," he said to Victoria and the security team, his voice carrying the same weight he'd used when banning Connor. "She's a vendor for the executive kitchen and was assaulted in the main lobby approximately 30 minutes ago by Connor Hale. He physically restrained her, pursued her when she fled, and damaged hotel property attempting to prevent her escape." Victoria's fingers flew across her tablet. "Connor Hale. I have his guest record here. He was scheduled for a meeting in the restaurant at 3. Cancel it. Add him to the permanent exclusion list." Matteo's tone allowed no argument. "And I want him removed from the property immediately. If he resists, call the police and file charges for assault and property damage." One of the security guards, a broad-shouldered man with silver threading through his dark hair, nodded crisply. "We have him contained in the lobby, sir. He's been demanding access to this elevator, claiming he glanced at me, something almost apologetic in his expression, his fiancée is in danger." "Ms. Vance is not his fiancée," Matteo said, his hand tightening slightly around mine. "She's not in danger from anyone except him. Make sure he understands that if he sets foot on this property again, if he approaches Ms. Vance anywhere in this building or on the surrounding grounds, I will pursue legal action with every resource available to me." The guard's expression shifted to something that might have been satisfaction. Understood, sir. We'll handle it. See that you do. Mateo paused, then added, and remind the lobby staff that vendors and service workers deserve the same protection as paying guests. Anyone who witnesses harassment or assault and fails to intervene or report it will face disciplinary action. Victoria made notes on her tablet, her fingers moving rapidly. I'll send a memo to all departments immediately. Good. Mateo glanced down at me, and some of that boardroom authority softened. Ms. Vance still has a delivery to make to the executive kitchen. Please have someone escort her pastries up, carefully, and inform Chef Romaine that she'll be delayed by approximately 15 minutes due to circumstances beyond her control. Of course. Victoria's expression had warmed considerably, her earlier neutrality replaced with something almost protective. Should we comp her delivery fee for the inconvenience? No, I said quickly, finding my voice. That's not necessary. I can double it, Mateo interrupted smoothly. Ms. Vance's products survived a significant elevator malfunction without damage, which speaks to exceptional quality. Consider it a bonus for resilience. My cheeks flushed. You can't just. I can, actually. My building, my discretion. He turned back to Victoria. Also, Ms. Vance will need an updated vendor access card. One that allows her to use the main lobby entrance rather than the service corridors. Mr. DeLuca, I protested, but his thumb brushed across my knuckles, a small, intimate gesture that the others couldn't see, and I fell silent. The service entrance will remain available if you prefer it, he said, his voice dropping to something more private despite the audience. But you should have the choice. No more sneaking through back hallways unless you want to. The weight of what he was doing settled over me. This wasn't just about Connor. This was about rewriting how I moved through spaces, how I saw myself. From invisible vendor to someone worth protecting. Worth prioritizing. Thank you, I managed, the words inadequate but genuine. His expression softened further, almost imperceptible unless you were watching for it. Come. Let's go make sure Connor understands his welcome has been permanently revoked. I don't need to, I can just wait here while. Ilera. He said my name quietly, but with enough firmness that I met his eyes. You said yes in that elevator. Yes means you stop hiding. Yes means you face this with me beside you. He was right. I'd made my choice in the amber darkness, and now I had to live it. I straightened my shoulders, still holding his hand, and nodded. Okay. Let's go. Together, we walked toward the service elevator that would take us back down to the lobby, to Connor, to the moment where everything would either fall apart or finally begin to make sense. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen, not the cramped commercial space above the bakery where I'd hidden from the world, but a sun-drenched workspace with marble counters, professional-grade ovens, and windows that overlooked the city like a promise, and realized I'd stopped counting steps to the exit. The sign outside read Vance and DeLuca Pastries, in elegant gold lettering, though I'd fought Mateo on the name for 3 weeks before finally conceding. Not because he demanded it, but because he'd quietly pointed out that his name on the door meant a certain kind of protection, a certain kind of respect, and hadn't I said I wanted to stop making myself small? He'd been infuriatingly right, as usual. The bergamot cream is perfection, said Chef Romaine, the Aurora Grand's executive chef who'd become not just a client but something close to a friend. He stood at my counter, sampling the latest additions to my line with the kind of focused attention I'd once found intimidating. Now I just found it gratifying. The balance between the citrus and the white chocolate, it's remarkable. My pastry chef has been trying to replicate this flavor profile for months. Trade secret, I said, smiling as I piped delicate rosettes onto a tray of lemon tarts. My hands were steady now, confident in their movements. No trembling, no second guessing. But I can do an exclusive contract for the Aurora Grand if you're interested. I'm always interested in your work, Alara. He glanced around the kitchen, taking in the organized chaos of cooling racks, the assistant I'd hired last month carefully tempering chocolate, the orders lined up for afternoon deliveries. You've built something impressive here. Matteo chose well. I'd learned not to bristle at comments like that, the implication that I was somehow Matteo's project rather than my own achievement. People would think what they wanted to think. What mattered was that I knew the truth. He'd given me space and protection and opportunity, but I'd done the building myself. We chose each other, I said simply, and meant it. The bell above the door chimed, and I didn't have to look up to know who it was. I'd learned the sound of his footsteps, the particular way he moved through space, economical, purposeful, controlled. Chef Romain, Matteo said, his voice carrying that smooth authority that still made something flutter in my chest. I hope you're not monopolizing all of Alara's afternoon samples. Only the best ones, Romain replied with a grin, completely at ease in a way he'd never been during that first tense conversation in the lobby 6 months ago. Matteo had that effect on people once you understood the rules. Respect earned respect, quality earned investment, and loyalty earned protection. I was just finalizing our holiday contract. Alara's going to create something special for our New Year's Eve gala. She usually does. Matteo crossed to where I stood, and without thinking about it, I leaned slightly into his space as he dropped a kiss on my temple. Casual, comfortable, the kind of gesture that had taken us months to build toward. Though I'm biased. Hopelessly, I agreed, glancing up at him. He'd come from a meeting, still in his charcoal suit, though he'd loosened his tie slightly, and there was something in his expression that suggested it had gone well. Good afternoon. Better now. His hands settled on the small of my back, warm through my chef's coat. Not possessive the way Connor's touch had been, always positioning and controlling. Just present. Steady. Victoria wants to know if you're still available for the hotel anniversary event next month. Apparently the board was impressed with your work at the spring fundraiser. 6 months ago, the idea of creating pastries for a roomful of wealthy investors and board members would have terrified me. Now it just felt like another challenge, another opportunity to prove what I'd always known I could do if someone would just give me the space to do it. Tell her yes, I said. But I'm bringing my assistant. I'm not doing 500 petit fours alone again. Reasonable. He smiled, that slight controlled expression that meant more than broader gestures from other men. Though you did make it look effortless. It wasn't effortless. I didn't sleep for 3 days. I remember. His voice dropped slightly, intimate despite Romain's presence. I also remember you standing in that event room afterward, exhausted and flour-dusted, watching people rave about your work, and finally believing you were as good as I'd been telling you all along. He was right. That had been the moment, not when the business launched, not when the first major client signed, but when I'd stood in a room full of people who didn't know my history or my struggles and watched them recognize my skill for what it was. Remarkable, Matteo had called me in that elevator. It had taken months to believe him. Romain cleared his throat delicately. I should get back. The dinner service won't prep itself. He nodded to both of us, his expression warm. Thank you, Alara. The bergamot cream is going on next week's dessert menu. I'll send the contract details this evening. After he left, the kitchen settled into a comfortable quiet broken only by my assistant's gentle humming and the whir of the mixer. Matteo stayed where he was, his hands still resting on my back, watching me work with that same focused attention he'd given me in the elevator 6 months ago. What? I asked, not looking up from my piping but unable to hide my smile. Just observing. His thumb traced a small circle against my spine. Noting that you're not counting steps to the door anymore. I paused, tart half finished, and met his eyes. He saw too much, always had. It should have frightened me, that level of perception. Instead, it felt like being known. No, I agreed softly. I'm not running anymore. Good. He leaned down, close enough that I could smell cedar and expensive cologne and the faint scent of coffee. Because I much prefer you like this. Rooted. Building. Remarkable. I set down my piping bag and turned fully to face him, flour dusting my hands, my chef's coat wrinkled from hours of work, my hair escaping its braid in ways that would have mortified the version of me who'd crashed into that elevator. Thank you, I said, meaning it for everything. For the protection and the space and the faith. For teaching me that power didn't have to mean control, that protection didn't require possession, that someone could stand beside you without making you smaller. You don't need to thank me. His hand came up to cup my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. You did this yourself. We did it together, I corrected, and pulled him down into a kiss that tasted like bergamot cream and new beginnings and the life I'd finally stopped running toward and started living. Outside, the city hummed with afternoon traffic. Inside, in a kitchen with my name on the door and flour on my hands and a man who'd turned a catastrophe into salvation, I was exactly where I belonged. No more counting steps. No more making myself small. Just me, building something sweet from the ashes of who I used to be, one perfect pastry at a time.